Misfits, Midtown, Misfits, Midtown, Misfits, Midtown, Misfits, Midtown, Misfits, Midtown, Misfits, Midtown, Misfits. Hey.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome back, Misfits, and welcome back to a new episode. Today, in Misfit fashion,
of course,
we are revisiting one of our past episodes, and we're giving it a new twist.
Yeah. So new series, looking back. It's a whole thing. It is a whole thing. And I feel like we've warned you several times that we will revisit things in random moments. And here it is.
And here it is. This is the perfect example. And this is a monumental occasion just because this episode is from season 1 and it's specifically episode 13.
It is an early one. So, yes, we're going way back.
We are going way back. And first of all, before we get into anything, I just wanted to, if you've been here since episode 13 or before, and you heard these episodes, you've been like walking with us this whole time, I just want to say thank you because...
And God bless you, like extra. For sticking with us.
Because, extra oil on you. Yadi and I were talking about revisiting this episode. And I was like, okay, well, let's listen to it because I don't know what we talked about and we can revisit those women that we talked about. And it was so hard for me to get through that episode.
I still haven't heard it, but just by the comments you told me, I was like, yep, I remember those days. Where we were a lot more rigid, a lot more like, let's just stick to what we know.
Yeah, we were still trying to figure it out. It was not very like conversational. It was very much like we were just reading off of like what we have prepared. It was just inexperience really. And not only inexperience, but caveat, like we had been friends for 3 months, like however long.
Yeah, whatever episode, just add like 2 weeks to that because that's probably as long as we know each other. So 13 weeks, we've known each other like 15 weeks.
Yeah. Just like feeling each other out, feeling the podcast world out, talking into mics for the first time. Yeah, it was a whole event. But yeah, if you listened to that episode, if you enjoyed it, if you made it all the way through, because good God, that episode was long. Thank you.
It was a lot too.
Yes. Looking back now, we're very happy as to where God has brought us and how far we've come.
Yeah, we're grateful for those. But yes, we're very grateful to where we are now.
But yeah, having said that, we are going to talk about season 1, episode 13. It is called The Bad Girls Club, where we talked about the quote unquote bad girls of the Bible and why they were so-called bad girls or why we thought that they were bad girls. Today, we're looking back at that episode and looking at these women with a new lens.
Yeah. Trying to see a new perspective. Yeah, something different.
Yes, because as we said several times now, it's been a while and we've changed. We've grown in our Bible literacy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Right? We've grown as humans and our perspective and our worldview and such. And I think we can definitely address this again and just see if we find something different. And if you want to get the other side of the story, again, this is episode 13, so you can go all the way back and listen to that. If you've been listening to our current stuff and you can't get through that episode, I don't blame you.
Yeah, it's okay if you don't. It's okay.
It's okay. It really is okay. You're excused. But if you do want to know what we talked about first, about the perspective of like, gosh, look at what they did, shocker, and then look at this new perspective, then you should definitely listen to both just so you can get a whole perspective and a world view of what we're talking about.
Yeah, a little bit more rounded.
Yes, definitely. You can get the whole picture. So to start out our flashback, we're going to talk about Lot's wife.
Lot's wife.
That's our number 1. Yes. So first, as always, we're going to give you a quick recap of who she was and what she did. And, context. Context is important for the Misfits. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to get into what we're actually talking about today. So as seen by her title, Lot's wife, we don't know her name. This is just...
No name.
The first thing that we have to clear up.
Not a shocker at all.
No. And although this may sound strange, there are actually many people in the Bible who are essentially anonymous because we know of them, but we don't know their names. However, name or not, she is a person who is still talked about and for good reason So we just have to discuss her, especially on this like take two of the quote unquote bad girls. So first, we have to go all the way back to Abraham and Lot, right? So we're in the book of Genesis, and we see that Abraham and Lot have been traveling together, and they were on their way to Canaan, aka the promised land that we've mentioned so much.
Yes.
Eventually, as their story continues, their herdsmen, or the men who were in charge of their livestock, started to have some beef between each other, which the Bible calls quarreling. It sounds way fancier with that word. They were quarreling amongst each other, and they basically had too much livestock, and so probably like the cattle were crossing each other. Yeah, it's like, is that your cow or my cow? Your sheep or my sheep? Like, what's going on? Yeah, so there was like an administrative disaster.
Yeah, like they're eating my food. No, that's my food. All right, it's just, a lot going on.
We can imagine. So Abraham, and this is in the Misfit paraphrase, Abraham says, okay, the only logical thing here is for us to split up. And he let Lot take the first pick of where he wanted to go. So then Lot looks around and he notices the area around the Jordan River was more fertile for his livestock, of course. So there was more water, there was more crops, whatever. So he chooses that area. And then the Bible proceeds to tell us that Lot sets up his tent near Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yes.
Which is just a huge, just red flag in itself.
Right. Yeah. But he was just looking at, it looks so pretty, I'm going to benefit from this. So regardless of what's there, I'm just seeing the fruit of it, if you will, like what's perceived. So he decided to go that way.
Exactly. That's a good point. Good pointing that out. That was good. Put that in your pocket, y'all. We're going to come back to that. So the Bible tells us the men of Sodom were, quote, extremely wicked and constantly sinned against the Lord. And we see that in Genesis 13:13. Now, from Genesis 13 to Genesis 14, Lot goes from setting his tent near Sodom to living in Sodom. Yes. And you don't have to be a theologian or a Bible scholar to know about Sodom and Gomorrah. Like this place is literally mentioned in movies.
Like, I just think, like, I don't think it happened from one day to the next. I feel like he just got comfortable, So it was like inching his way over. Before he knew it, he was like, oh, wow, I'm inside.
Yeah, and it's like his tent was near Sodom, but like what way was it facing? You know what I mean? Was it facing the opposite way, or was it facing towards them?
And how much did he interact with Sodom and Gomorrah, to where in, a chapter's time, which I don't know how many years that was, but whatever that time frame was, like, he found himself in. So that's just interesting. Just something to think about.
It is very interesting. Okay, so we know this episode is starting to, it's supposed to be about Lot's wife. Yes, we know. But as we were like preparing for the episode, it is. We're getting there. But as we were studying for the episode, we kept seeing all the things that Lot compromised in his life to stay in Sodom. Like, we see even this tiny jump of like being near Sodom to being in Sodom. Like, what was it that called him over there? Because you have to make a choice.
Yeah, what pushed him to like make that decision? Yeah, exactly.
So from what we see in the Bible, we know that Lot didn't agree with the sins of Sodom or fully agree with the sins of Sodom. We see that in Genesis 19 verses 4 through 10, but he did compromise, and we see that in those verses as well. I'm not going to quote the verses for you, but you can go look at it, and you see him trying to intervene and protect the angels and be like, no, don't harm them. And then being like, but you can take my daughters.
Yeah.
And that's the situation that we're talking about. Like, you can see this tension of like, okay, I'm protecting the men of God, but also you could take them and it'll be fine, or like, that's the best thing he could come up with.
And like, yeah, like acknowledging the wickedness that was happening, wanting to do something right in exchange for something basically bad, but in his eyes less bad, I guess. So, yeah.
But we can assume from what we know of Lot and his family that his compromises made it hard for his family and friends to truly believe in God. The compromise destroyed his testimony, and so it makes us ask the question, what kind of leadership and direction did Lot provide in his home? And did he attempt to lead his household in a way that his wife and children would have been saved?
Right. Did they see that example from him? Like his faithfulness to God or his belief in God, like all those things. It's just interesting.
Yeah, because I feel like there's a big leap, and we don't know a lot of the context and a lot of the story, but I feel like there's a big leap between Abraham and Lot like the Lot version that was with Abraham, and then the Lot version that's in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Which speaks to like closeness, right? To like the people of God. So that's a whole thing right there. So that just, I was like,
a whole different web.
I know. That's a whole other avenue we could go down with. But yeah, so Lot's wife was not a believer. And from when we see, just in context, of course, because there's not a lot said about her in the text. Lot doesn't meet her; she doesn't become his wife and all that until he actually lives in Sodom, because he doesn't have a wife when he's with Abraham. So we can assume that she's from there, right? Like that's where he met her, because that's where he was living at the time. And so she was not an Israelite, and so she grew up essentially in all the wickedness that is Sodom. That was normal to her. It was a lifestyle. So we don't know to what capacity she was involved in it, but it was around her. That was her city. That's where she was from. So it wasn't strange to her, weird that, people did what they did, that they were wicked, that they were, bad people, that they didn't believe in God and all these other things. And so because we can assume that Lot wasn't calling out the sin of the people based on some of the actions he took, right? But instead he decided to just live among them. So to us, when we read this, it's not a surprise that, when we read the story of his wife and the fact that she looked back as they were leaving, that she did that. Like, that's not surprising, because that's what she knew. That's what she was comfortable with. And so, she wanted to see what was happening. So to her, it was an easy action to do, right? Even though she was told not to. So even with the warnings, and there were some warnings, like, men came to warn him about, hey, we're going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. But we can see that he doesn't really have urgency. So again, it kind of speaks to his like complacency almost, or like his compromise of like, yes, I believe God, but I'm not like my actions aren't speaking what I what I should be doing. And so they had already told him like, hey, you need to get out of here. And so what we see is like the angels were actually the ones pushing him out and telling him, hey, you need to hurry up. And so he does go with them eventually, but it almost feels like he's not that he's not sure, but he doesn't feel that hurry up and go kind of.
Yeah, like, I know I have to go, but do I have to go right now?
Yeah, like he wasn't sure if like, is now? Like, are you sure? Like, is there really danger? I don't know.
Right. And the angels indeed answered that question.
They're like, no, and they literally like basically pulled him out. And it says, the Bible tells us that because of the Lord's compassion for him, the man grabbed his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his two daughters, and they brought him out and led him outside the city. And we see this in Genesis 19:60. So literally, like, he didn't have the urgency that they had to pull him out before he like got destroyed with the whole city, which is crazy. Like, if you got a warning, like, I'd be like, don't worry about anything, just like get your shoes and go. But he was like, I don't know.
They literally removed him like a bouncer. Like, you have to go.
Yeah, there is no time. I am removing you from this place. So as far as husband and wife, Lot as the husband, we know as God says that he was supposed to submit to God. And in this situation, he should have been obedient. He should have had the urgency. He should have led his family like, hey, we gotta go. He should have, done it on his own accord, not wait till these angels were coming and be like, you gotta go. God is merciful. But really, I think as head of house, like he should have looked out for his family, right? And for his wife and kids, and not been so like kind of slack and kind of almost stubborn and being like, I don't know about the situation, or, I don't really want to go yet, or something like that.
Yeah. And this is not to say that, because, when we're super close to God, we're super sensitive to spiritual things, right? And you're super sensitive to sin and to just like things that you've already been freed from, and everything is just heightened, right? And this is not to say that when he first loved Abraham and then he was living near Sodom, that he wasn't like more sensitive to like, what are these people doing? You know what I mean? And when he moved into Sodom, that after he got married and stuff, that he didn't have a conversation of like, hey, what do you think if we go live with my uncle Abraham? Or what do you like, that he wasn't trying to lead them out at some point. But we can just see, like you said, the compromise just kind of over and over and over, no matter if she just said no or whatever it was that was happening. Even the fact that he was comfortable living near Sodom, right? Because what this reminds me of, this is a very dramatic comparison, but it reminds me of Judas.
Right. Yeah. They gave fruit. Yeah.
This thorn grows out of the dirt, and it's like, oh, here you go, take him. And the same way, that's probably what was happening to Lot. Like there was some strife or something that he had in him that he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna pick the best place, and then this is where I'm gonna settle down.
And I think just being exposed to all that, and even again not having proximity to other people, like other Israelites, other people of God. I mean, he was fighting an uphill battle. So if he wasn't doing something to try to stay connected and stay aware of like, hey, this is a wicked place, like I need to keep that in mind, it's very easy to like kind of like his wife, see it as something normal, or just be reminded every once in a while, like in your everyday, you might not notice it, or it might take you a while to be like, whoa, wait, no, this was bad, because you're like in it, you're living it now.
Yeah, it's like example of the current, like when you're in a ocean or whatever, and you're like, oh, there's my family, and you're just playing in the water and playing in the water and playing in the water. All of a sudden you look up and you're at the other side of the beach and you didn't even know you got there.
And they look like little ants and you're like, what happened? Yeah, exactly. And not, again, like we said, like it wasn't that he agreed with all of it, but he was exposed to it and he wasn't like calling it out. He was compromising it. So, thank God for his compassion, because we've all been in situations like that where we've had moments where, we've been stubborn and we maybe didn't want to move either, or maybe we got complacent in some things, And so God needs to move us. And so sometimes it's a job, a relationship, just an addiction, a vice, anything. We can relate to Lot in that way because, he kind of took his eyes off of God a little bit, or kind of let the world seem like a normal place and not seeing like, whoa, this is not where I need to be. And I think we can all relate in some way that we've let something in our life do that, to where it became like, oh, this is fine, or this is okay, when we know it goes against the desire for God, the desire that God has for our life.
Because God had to pry us out. And for me, it's been both a job and relationships. Like, I put all these examples. I was like, no. I got like 2 out of 4 where it was like, I need you to go, and I'm just going to have to remove this person. Because I was talking to this guy, and then he ended up like, I was like so in it in this relationship. And this was, of course, before I was married and everything. It wasn't the relationship I had to be in. We were just dating and talking and stuff like that. And literally he broke up with me because I wouldn't have been able to do it. But that was God's mercy.
Right. He was pulling you out.
You know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh, I'm looking back at it now and I'm like, good God, thank you for saving me, because I don't know what I would have done. Or like, you like this guy and he doesn't like you back. And then you look back 10 years later and you're like, oh my gosh, that would have been a disaster. You know what I mean? Like
you would have been hurting a lot. Things could have been so much worse. So yeah, he's like, I need to get you out, girl. And he did, there's those situations.
Yeah, it sucked at the time, but he did get me out. Yeah, he did use those angels to pull me by the hand.
You are leaving.
And escort me out of the place.
Like, you are not listening. I'm going to pull you out. You're welcome.
Yeah, it's like a spiritual eviction.
Yeah, sometimes he's like, okay, I'll let you take a minute. And sometimes he's like, nah, I have something else. Get out. God shows up, whether he gives us some time or he just pulls us out. Like he has ways and he speaks to us. And yes, we have to be able to choose. But if we're being attentive to his voice, like he's gonna show up and he's gonna give us a way out. So back to the story, we can definitely have some compassion for Lot's wife, just like God had compassion for Lot. And the reason for that is because, yes, she did get a command to not look back. And so the Bible does tell us that in Genesis 19:26, it says, but Lot's wife looked back as she was following behind him, and she turned into a pillar of salt. And so what this tells us is that she loved Sodom. Like, it was her home, and she looked back and so for her looking back, that was like more important to her, right? Like, she got a command from God and she wasn't obedient to it because she felt like she had to look back. And so maybe it was sadness, like she was sad to see it destroyed, or to leave her home, or be like, I know people there. Like, I don't know if she had her family there, like, all that stuff. And so it's like, for her, that moment was more important than to be like, oh, God himself is telling me to leave. But did she know God? Did she understand what that meant? And I think for her, it's like, well, to me, that's what I know. So I'm going to look back. And so, she had a moment where she's like, well, I'm sad about this. I'm going to miss it. And all these different things that could have happened in her moment of why she looked back. And so we're coming to her defense today because we want to talk about the other perspective of her disobedience, which is Sodom might have been all she knew, right? Think back to when you were first saved and how at some point something that goes against the word of God was just super normal to us. Like we said, like we had vices, we had things, relationships that we were living in, doing that even when we got saved, like it took a while for God to expose those things and for us to realize like, hey, these don't line up to what God has for me, right? We've all done something that goes against his word. We've all been an enemy of God in some way, but thankfully, he has his mercy. And so we didn't turn into pillars of salt by staying in a situation or looking at something for a little too long and not being obedient, And
a lot of it is understanding because even when you get saved, there's a lot of things that the Bible tells us to do. And like the preacher is preaching at you and he's like trying to teach you something. But if you don't agree because you don't understand it, you still don't want to do it. Right. And I think the biggest one is like abstinence. It's like you could be saved, but if you don't understand or believe that the word of God is true and that the reason that he's telling you not to have sex before marriage, or if you've already had sex, to abstain from sex until you get married is protection for your soul, then I'm not going to do it. And it's crazy because it just takes time. And I remember, we listened to Jackie Hill Perry a lot, and she was in this interview. She was saying that when God first approached her, it was like she felt like, well, you want me to drop everything that I'm doing. Like she was attracted to women. She was in relationships with women. So she was in same-sex relationships and she was smoking weed and she was doing all this stuff. And she's like, I don't want to give all that up. And God told her, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like, I'm not worried about all that. I need you to get to know me. And then what she felt was like, oh, well, if I get to know him, then everything else is going to fall by the wayside, which it always does. But like similar to Lot's wife, like if she had lived and didn't turn into a pillar of salt, we could have had grace for her and just look back at her story and be like, oh man, she just didn't know. She didn't understand. Like it wasn't like when Moses saw the burning bush and he just knew and he's like, okay, I'm following you. Or Abraham Abraham didn't know God, right? And then all of a sudden he's like, okay, well, I'm following you now and this is all we're doing and let's go, right?
Yeah, let's go. Yeah,
exactly. But she didn't have that encounter, right? Like her salvation story was different. It was like she didn't have that moment where she just saw these angels and she's like, oh my gosh. And she like fell to her face. Like that wasn't the case.
Yeah. Like recognizing that was God sent, like she didn't have that moment where she realized this situation is from God. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is to your point about Lot's leadership. He didn't lead her into salvation. He didn't lead her to know about the one true God. So it's just like we all have, I feel like her story is a lot of people's story where it's like some people were saved at 12 and then some people got saved at 50. Like if she had lived, maybe she would have been saved later on or whatever. But it's like taking that moment to realize like, oh, she had somebody give her the gospel and she just didn't receive it that one time, which also speaks of the urgency of receiving the gospel and just knowing that Jesus can come back at any time. But that's another story.
I feel like we could have taken like 5 different caveats by now, but yeah, no, like there's just like what could have been, right? But obviously we know that like as far as her life, it is an example and she's mentioned again like in the New Testament. So it is like she did stand out. But I think when we see all the situation and the circumstance that she was in, like that's why we can have compassion for her, just because we know that she didn't know God and she wasn't longing for that. And not that Lot never mentioned God or didn't pray. Like we don't know any of that, but just seeing his reaction and the fact that he didn't have urgency to be obedient just kind of lets us know that she, if he didn't, well, then she didn't. Like, how was she going to do it if she didn't even know this God that he knew and didn't live in it and grow up in it and everything? This Sodom was what she knew. And so we see this and we can see the compassion that we can have for her. And then in the same way, we can have compassion for ourselves and those around us. Like we have been in very similar situations that are unhealthy, but felt very normal because we were raised in them or we were used to being around them. And so God's trying to get us out of them, make us see where we were wrong. And when we do, that's happened, I'm sure, since you got saved, and that's been happening since I got saved, and, and everything, where sometimes I come across things and I'm like, oh God, I didn't realize I had done that. Or wow, I'm having these thoughts again, and I have to confess again and repent, because we're just a work in progress, right? Like, we're constantly trying to be better. And there's some things that get unveiled sometimes, and we're like, oh, I didn't realize I was still dealing with that, or I was carrying that. But God's merciful, and he sees us in our situations, and knows that he keeps revealing things to us, I guess is what I'm saying.
And for just to make it practical, because you've been saved for a long time, and that just sounds wrong, but you've been walking with the Lord for a while, right? From your youth. And then you have different experiences with different churches and all these things. But for people that are coming to Christ now, or that they haven't been on both sides of the fence like you've been, what is a thought that you're like, man, where did that come from? And you have to cast it down.
Sometimes it's just you hear the news, or you hear things around us that sometimes because it happens so often, sometimes you're just let's say feminism or something. Sometimes you can get bogged down because you want to be I want to be supportive of women, and yes, we have a voice, and there's a whole other side of that, biblically, right? God supporting women. But sometimes you can kind of see, you hear people talk about all the time, and then you kind of get sucked into some of the things they're thinking about. And so just not letting those thoughts surpass what God actually, the place that God has for me as a woman. And so I think that's an example of something that sometimes happens just because we're exposed to it so much. I hear about it at work. I see it on my social media. It can easily become something where if I'm not careful, these thoughts come in and be yeah, no, they're right. It shouldn't be that way. And it's whoa, does that line up with God? I think things like that can, kind of seep in and just kind of, make you think is that actually what God says? Or am I getting it, sucked into what I'm listening to or saying?
Right. It can dethrone the thought of the Bible being over whatever culture is talking about at the time, because it is it can, depending on where you are in your walk and how much you read the Bible and how much you are attuned to God, the world can be overwhelming, right? If you're hearing something from so many different places that you're just well, let me check it out. You know what I mean? I think something trending that I've noticed that I have not fed into, thankfully, but it's this whole Kanye going into the adult industry or whatever. And I'm what? First of all, I don't know if this is true, right? But you keep seeing it everywhere. And I feel that's a perfect example of something that the world is trying to feed you to just get you sucked in. You know what I mean? All they want you to do is okay, watch the YouTube videos, read the articles, just get sucked into it to the point where you start thinking about the adult industry, and it's all these freaking seeds that make me so mad that if people don't have discernment, it's so easy to just get caught up in it. But again, another topic, but that's a perfect example. What she said, the world just wants to feed you stuff. And if you are not aware, don't have discernment, and don't set proper boundaries, you're going to get swallowed up just like Lot's wife.
Yeah. So that's why it's so important to continue to renew our minds, read the word, be in prayer, so we can know the truth, right? And that's what's going to help us differentiate. I think, situations like that, for me, it's I have to come back to the word and be what does God say? So I don't allow some of these thoughts to kind of make me think, oh, wait a minute, that sounds pretty good. And it's wait, but is it God? Is it biblical? So coming out of a situation like this takes several things confessing and repenting about the situation, as well as surrendering the situation to God, renewing our minds with his truth, and unlearning those unhealthy behaviors. So to close, please know that although Lot was part of the situation, the Bible tells us in 2 Peter 7, he literally calls Lot righteous. So I think at face value, we can't really see that we really don't see that in his story, just based on this situation and him living there and all that. But thank God that he sees, God sees the end from the beginning, and he calls us by a different name. So even though this whole story of Lot, we see a lot of compromising. We see later on that he calls him righteous. So we know that God just sees the whole picture, basically.
And that's mind-blowing, because I was like, I'm sorry, what? How is he righteous? Like, what is he? Like, I literally had to have a conversation about it and be like, I don't agree. And why? Yeah, ¿dónde
Show
está? ¿Dónde
Show
está?
me. And he's like, I told you, believe me.
Exactly.
All right, I get it. But yeah, so one of the best examples of this is in Genesis 20, when Abraham lies by omission, for the second time, mind you, about Sarah being only his sister rather than his wife. And so God literally calls him a prophet right after that situation. Like, he literally lied. And then God's like, you're a prophet. So that's the kind of God we serve, you know? Like, he's just faithful. He sees us for who we are as a whole, not for one thing or, you know, for one incident, one mistake, one situation. You know, he doesn't put label on us and be like, a liar, because he could have done that with Abraham, been like, you're a liar. And this is your second time, so you're a big fat liar, you know? He didn't. He's like, I have just so much for you, and I see where you're going and all the things that I have lined up for you, that yes, this is a mistake you made. It was a bad one, but I see you as a whole and you are a prophet, which is amazing.
It's crazy. He's like, yes, he lied. Have my prophet Abraham pray for you. I'm sorry, what? The one that just lied? Literally almost destroyed the promise because Isaac hadn't been born. Like, Sarah almost had a baby by somebody else. Like, it was a whole thing. And he was like, have my prophet Abraham pray for you. And in this moment, it's funny because I was reading the commentary, and it's like Abimelech was the one that was acting righteous, even though he was a pagan. And imagine being Abimelech and being, I made the right decision. Like, God came to me and I stopped and I gave her back to her husband and all of these things. And then God says, hey, that guy that lied to you, have him pray for you. And then I will open the wombs of all the women in your land. And it's like, how dare you, sir? Have the liar pray for me. He's not a liar. He's a prophet. What?
Prophet where? Again, where? Show me.
I was like, God is outrageous. Like, my goodness. And thank God, right? Like, we're looking at other people as if they weren't us, because we've been them also. But it just shows you how good God is. And also, like, please know, like, we know the end of the story, right? In regards to the Bible and Abraham. So, like, when we talk about people, don't think that we're talking about them from beginning to end. We were literally just taking it. It's like a case-by-case scenario. And we're looking at this specific verse and this specific chapter in this specific context, because that's how we humans judge people. I don't think we need to have a conversation about that. You've known someone that lied, and you're like, in this chapter of my life, he's a liar. And then, 6 months later, you find out it was the truth, or you forgive them or whatever. And it's like, oh, okay. In Genesis 35, he's redeemed.
I didn't know that at the time. So I'm reading it and being like, what?
Yes.
But he's a liar. It's wild and beautiful.
It is. It's amazing. It's amazing and hard to comprehend.
But thank you, Jesus.
Exactly. Thank you. But yeah, man, that's Lot's wife. That is her story. That is our review of our previous opinion of her when we had first started doing this podcast. And then 3 years later, we're looking back at Lot's wife, and we can have compassion, because the woman just grew up in a terrible environment and she knew no better. She didn't have somebody around her to speak the truth or give her the gospel, because Lot was a little compromised at the time. And as we see, he was still righteous, but she's just the perfect picture of someone who just needed to, first of all, she needed to be saved. Second of all, she needed to be discipled. She needed to be sanctified, and she needed therapy. Those are all the things that she needed. She's a snapshot of who we were at one point in our lives.
And that's what I was going to say. I was like, we're thankful that we have been a Lot's wife version, but God has redeemed. God has redeemed. So we can relate to her.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that her and I don't have in common is that she was a pillar of salt, and he never made me a pillar of salt, because I could have been one as well. That's Lot's wife. That is us revisiting Lot's wife We hope you learned something about Lot's wife that you didn't know before, or about Lot, or about Abraham, or about Moses, or about all the people that we mentioned today.
All the surrounding things.
And we hope that you enjoyed this episode. We will be back and we will revisit another bad girl from this episode that we did before. Again, like we said, this is episode 13. So if you want to catch up, go listen to that one. For the next couple of weeks, we'll be talking about these women again and revisiting a new perspective about their story. But we hope that you enjoyed this episode. And as always, this is Fran.
This is Yadi.
We are the Midtown Misfits, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.